This 3D printer is fast, inexpensive, feature-rich, and it runs Klipper, complete with a touchscreen. But despite the price and features, it's not really for beginners, and we'll get into why right after this. I'm Brian, and you are watching BV3D. Hello 3D printing friends, and welcome back. Okay, so today we're taking a look at the Sovol SV07, and I'd like to thank Sovol for sending this over so I could show it to you. As I mentioned in the intro, it's an inexpensive, fast, feature-rich Klipper-based printer. But this is for tinkerers. It's not for people new to 3D printing, and I'll explain what I mean by that, but first, let's cover the specs and features. So, the Sovol SV07 has a metal base with an injection molded plastic faceplate featuring a built-in tool drawer. It has a build volume of 220mm by 220mm by 250mm. The Y and Z axes are made of 2040 aluminum extrusions, while the X axis is made of a 2020 aluminum extrusion. All three axes ride on V-slot wheels. The X and Y axes have belt tensioning knobs. The tool head has bright LED lighting and a direct drive extruder feeding 1.75mm filament to a high flow hot end with a 0.4mm brass nozzle, which can reach up to 300 degrees Celsius. The tool head also has an inductive probe for mesh bed leveling, and the printer probes the bed in a 5x5 grid to create that mesh. The bed can get to 100 degrees Celsius and has a magnetic spring steel build plate with a textured PEI coating on both sides. One more thing about the bed, Sovol included screws and standoffs, so if you want to, you can remove the springs and leveling knobs and mount the bed in a solid, non-adjustable way. I chose to do that partly because at the time of recording we're getting into winter and spring is long past. Get it? Spring. But also because I wanted to confirm that the leveling probe would do its job, and so far it hasn't let me down. In addition to the typical parts cooling blower built into the tool head itself, there's also a big auxiliary cooling blower mounted to the X-axis arm. The printer has dual Z-axis motors and lead screws, and while it doesn't have the lead screws synchronized with the belt, it does automatically align the Z-axis by making use of the bed probe. It has a 5-inch Klipper screen, which is a self-contained touchscreen computer running Klipper. The printer includes a Wi-Fi radio for network connectivity. The screen is connected to the printer via USB, which it uses to communicate with the control board inside the printer that's running the other half of Klipper. Klipper is kind of this split firmware, where it uses code running on a small single-board computer to do the heavy lifting for the math needed to interpret G-code files, and it converts that into timing and movement commands that get sent to the control board inside the printer. Sovol claims printing speeds up to 500 millimeters per second on this printer, though on one part of the product page they recommend a print speed of 250 millimeters per second for optimal results, and on the tech specs part of the page they recommend a print speed of up to 80 millimeters per second. The printer has a 350 watt Meanwell power supply, and it has a filament runout sensor, so it can let you know when you need to run out and get more. Yeah, I know that joke's getting old and tired, but hey, so am I. And if I have to get up here every week to show up in a video, so does that joke. Okay, with the specs out of the way, here are some things I printed with it. To start with, I printed some of the files that were already on the machine. This is the bed test model. It prints 9 squares with lines connecting them and prints a tower in the center. This stopped with an error on the screen. I suspect the model was taller than the printer's max Z height. When the printer stopped with that error, it turned off the bed, but it left the nozzle hot for several hours. That's not a good failure mode. Despite that, the tower itself looks pretty good with nice, even layers. Next, I printed the Benchy that was in the printer's file list. It only took 26 minutes and it came out really good. That's hard to tell with the white filament, but the only negative, and it's not much of one, is just a tiny bit of stringing. Everything else looks really good. The next model I printed from the printer's file list was called Skull. And as you can see, it's not a skull. Instead, it's a mesh bowl that reminds me of an Apple HomePod Mini. This took 5 hours and 45 minutes to print, which sounds like a long time, but this model is very heavy on retraction moves, which I've seen cause problems for other printers. On the SV07, it completed without a problem. The last it came with the printer model is the model named Model, and what that really means is it's an Easter Island Moai. Printing in just 2 hours and 50 minutes, it has a few issues. There's a wavy ripple under the chin, and there are some Z-seam zits. Everything else on it looks pretty good. Just to see if that chin ripple and the zits were because of the filament, I printed it again in a different filament and got the same result. Although, to be fair, that is a pretty steep overhang on the chin. Next, I wanted to slice and print my own model, so I used Sovol's reskinned Cura to slice a McGybeer Cali-Dragon. It only took 24 minutes to print, and it came out really good. Just a little bit of stringing between the antlers, but the backs of them look good, and I'm happy with this result. I also sliced and printed a CaliCat model, and that only took 19 minutes to print. Now the only real issue I see on it is a little bit of ringing on the y-axis sides of the model. Apart from that, it seems really good. I printed Luby 3D's Aria the Dragon, which took 1 hour and 25 minutes. It's a really nice print with a super smooth surface finish. One last print to show off, and that's this Securo box from Clockspring, available to his club members on printables. This printed in 3 hours and 15 minutes. It uses a print-in-place hinge and a captive screw latching mechanism. So the whole thing prints as a single piece, and the SV07 handled it perfectly. The hinge parts didn't bind, and the screw part turns like it should to let you securely close the box. And open it too, when you want to get to whatever you've stored inside. The only problem on this print is that one of the front corners lifted off the bed a little bit, but the model is still perfectly functional, and I hardly noticed that corner. Okay, remember when I said this printer was for tinkerers and not for new users? Well, this next part of the video is why I said that. Pull up a chair because I want to talk about some of the problems I had while using the printer. Klipper has a feature called input shaping, which helps it compensate for vibration that occurs when printing at high speeds. And one of the ways to calibrate that is to use an accelerometer to measure the vibrations of the X and Y axes. The SV07 includes an accelerometer for that exact purpose. It's intended to be bolted to the toolhead to calibrate the X-axis and then bolted to the bed to calibrate the Y-axis and then taken off and put away when that's done. When it's in use, it connects to the screen with this cable. But the problem I have is that when I plug the cable into the screen and then plug the cable into the accelerometer, something shorts out and the screen powers off. If I plug it in when the printer's off and then turn the printer on, most times the printer won't boot at all. Again, because something seems to be shorting out. Other times the printer will turn on, but as soon as I touch the cable, the screen shorts out again. So I can't use the accelerometer to calibrate the input shaper. Another pain point is the Sovol Slicer software. It's a slightly modified version of Cura, mostly to include printer configurations for all the Sovol printers, and also to remove printer configurations for any other manufacturer's printers. Now, most printer manufacturers who do this at least produce both a Mac and a Windows version of the slicer, but Sovol is only putting out a Windows version. I do have access to Windows, so I was able to run the Sovol slicer, but I prefer working in Mac OS. Fortunately, Sovol does include settings so you can configure standard Cura to work with the SV07, but this doesn't seem to give quite the same results as the settings in the branded slicer. So I turned to YouTube and found that the wonderful human being at Gergo Print 3D made Sovol's printer profiles available in a zip file, and they made a video showing how to add that to standard Cura. So I was able to add the SV07 to Cura 550 and everything works correctly, except for the aux blower on the back of the X-axis. Although to be fair, in the current release of the Sovol slicer, the resulting G-code files don't turn that fan on either. The workaround is to use Cura's find and replace script, Search for the G-code command that turns on the regular parts cooling fan and replace it with that same command plus the command to turn on the aux blower. And then also add the command to turn off the aux blower in the ending G-code section of the printer settings when it's turning off the other fans. Then, when you slice files in Cura, the big fan turns on when the parts cooling blower turns on, and it all works like it's supposed to. Now, there were a couple of build quality issues. Back to that big aux fan. I noticed it was really loud when it was on, and after suffering with that for a few prints, I finally traced the problem to a loose screw holding the fan grill on the back of it. This screw had almost unscrewed itself completely, which was allowing the fan grill to buzz angrily, but once I tightened it up, the fan was a lot quieter. Now, more serious than a loose screw on a fan grill though was the fact that the extruder jammed. But it wasn't a normal jam where you get filament stuck somewhere and then things can't move. This jam was caused by another couple of loose screws. The gear attached to the output shaft of the extruder stepper motor has two grub screws which secure the gear to the shaft. Well, those two screws came loose, and one of them got jammed in the drive mechanism, preventing the extruder from being able to turn and therefore preventing the printer from being able to print. That's how I got this weird looking coaster. I had to disassemble the tool head and the extruder to find the problem. And once I did, and I determined that nothing was seriously broken, I got the grub screws back in place and I made sure they were good and tight, and I haven't had a problem with it since. I had an issue with a long print, and that was this layer shift on the Y-axis. I don't know if it's because the printer was moving too fast or what. Now, because of the shift, the lid won't fit on the box. So I can try to reprint it and hope it doesn't happen again, but I might try to salvage it by sanding that one part down so the lid will fit. Either way, I'm going to have to spend more time or more filament. Grr. Okay, having gone on that little adventure, let's talk about what I like and don't like about the printer, starting with the things I like. First, I like the LED lighting on the tool head, and I like the additional parts cooling fan on the X-axis arm. The flex plate is great for easily removing models from the bed once they're finished, and I also appreciate the tool drawer on the front of the printer. It's got that nice big Klipper touchscreen, and the onboard Wi-Fi lets you control the printer with a web browser, and that's pretty handy. The bed leveling has worked really well so far, and the printer can print pretty fast. Well, now, here's what I don't like on the printer. Between the hot end fans, the part cooling fan, the power supply fan, and the auxiliary parts fan, the noise this printer produces can be excessive. Now, printers typically need a lot of cooling when printing fast, but I wanted to mention it. The cable management from the base to the tool head almost seems like an afterthought. I don't like the way the ribbon cable just hangs there. The branded, reskinned Cura version that Sovol provides only exists in a Windows version, while Cura itself is available for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And while the pre-configured values for input shaping on this printer work pretty well, I can't actually calibrate the values to this specific printer because every time I plug the accelerometer in, something shorts out and the Klipper screen turns off. So, final thoughts. Sovol's hardware is usually pretty solid, and this printer feels like it's got good bones, but it also feels like it was rushed to market, like it got to the good enough point and they decided to start shipping. I think with a bit of time spent polishing the user experience and more quality checks during manufacturing to catch things like loose screws, this could get a lot closer to something a new user would be successful with. But as it stands now, I wouldn't recommend this as a first 3D printer. I think the learning curve is going to be a bit steep compared to other options available. You're going to need to be pretty good at working with your slicer settings, you're going to need to have a pretty good understanding of the mechanics of how a 3D printer works, and having a basic understanding of how the Klipper firmware works is going to help you out too. So that's why I think the people who will get the most out of this printer are people who like to tinker, and who either have Klipper experience already or want to get into it. At just over $250, this is a pretty inexpensive Klipper machine. Do you have an SV07? Let me know in the comments, and also let me know how long you've had it and what your experience with it has been. The problems I had were with this specific printer, so I want to know if things have improved or if the SV07 just has more than its share of little issues. So, that's the SV07. Thanks again to Sovol for sending this over for review. And big thanks to everyone who supports the channel, whether with channel memberships or by using the links in the description. If you liked this episode, give it a thumbs up and, maybe subscribe so you don't miss new ones. Well, 3D printing friends, that's about all the time we have for this one. And now that we're at the end, let's go print something cool.